For millions of years, evolution shaped the human body slowly, patiently, through countless generations. Yet, within a single lifetime, the same body now breaks down faster than evolution can respond. We live longer than any humans before us, but we age inside bodies designed for a world that no longer exists. Natural selection never promised durability, comfort, or long-term maintenance. It only needed us to survive long enough to reproduce. Everything beyond that was optional. What we call aging today may not be a flaw, or a disease, or a mistake. It may be the visible cost of outrunning our own evolutionary design. If evolution moves in generations, and aging unfolds in decades, evolution did not set out to build long-lasting bodies. It set out to build bodies that work just long enough. For most of human history, surviving into old age was rare, not because bodies failed unusually early, but because the environment was unforgiving. Injury, infection, starvation, and exposure shaped who lived long enough to pass on genes. In that context, there was little evolutionary pressure to maintain tissues indefinitely. What mattered was reaching maturity, reproducing, and helping offspring survive their most vulnerable years. Anything beyond that lay outside the central bargain of natural selection. The human body, as it emerged, reflects this priority with remarkable consistency. Growth is rapid early in life. Repair mechanisms are robust during childhood and early adulthood. Energy is allocated toward reproduction and physical resilience when it matters most for gene transmission. Then, gradually, the balance shifts. Maintenance becomes less thorough. Small errors accumulate, not because evolution failed, but because it had already succeeded at its primary task. This is where aging quietly begins, long before we recognize it as decline. From an evolutionary perspective, aging is not a single process, but a gradual easing of biological investment once reproductive value decreases. The body does not collapse all at once. Instead, it slowly relaxes its grip on perfection. Cells divide with slightly less accuracy. Repair systems still function, but with diminishing returns. These changes are subtle, often invisible for decades, yet they reflect a deep truth about our origins. Humans evolved in conditions where longevity offered little additional advantage beyond the years of active parenting and social contribution. There was no consistent benefit to sustaining peak biological performance into advanced age because few individuals ever reached it. As a result, evolution never shaped a body optimized for long-term durability. It shaped one optimized for early success. This logic explains why aging appears across so many species, not as an anomaly, but as a common outcome of how life adapts under constraint. Organisms must trade off between growth, reproduction, and maintenance. In humans, those trade-offs favored intelligence, social cooperation, and flexibility over cellular immortality. We gained large brains and long developmental periods, but we did not gain bodies that could renew themselves indefinitely. The design is coherent when viewed from the deep past. What feels like failure in old age is, in fact, the shadow of early life efficiency. Importantly, this does not mean evolution intended us to suffer. Evolution has no intentions. It operates through differential survival across generations, not through foresight or care for individuals. Aging, then, is not a program written to end life at a certain time. It is the gradual absence of strong selection to prevent deterioration after reproduction has already occurred. This absence becomes more noticeable as human environments change. As medicine, nutrition, and safety extend life far beyond ancestral norms, we encounter parts of our biology that were never tested by evolution. We live into decades where the body is still functioning, but no longer finely tuned. In these later years, the gap between what evolution prepared us for and what modern life allows becomes clear. Aging is the expression of that gap. It is not a sudden breakdown, but but a slow revealing of limits that were always there. Understanding this reframes the central question of this video. Humans do not age faster than evolution because something went wrong. They age faster because evolution never needed to move faster in the first place. To understand why the human body was never shaped for lasting durability, it helps to return to the conditions in which our species emerged. For most of human evolution, life unfolded within narrow margins. Food availability fluctuated. Seasons were unpredictable, physical injury was common, and even minor infections could become fatal. In such an environment, survival itself was uncertain, and longevity offered no guarantee of reproductive success. Under these pressures, evolution favored traits that delivered immediate returns: strength, speed, cognitive flexibility, and social bonding increased the chance of surviving childhood and reaching reproductive age. Once that threshold was crossed, the evolutionary payoff of further biological investment declined sharply. From this perspective, the human body resembles a structure built for rapid assembly rather than long-term maintenance. Systems that support growth and reproduction are reinforced early, while systems dedicated to slow repair and long-term preservation remain comparatively limited. This imbalance is not accidental. It reflects the reality that, across countless generations, individuals who reproduced early and effectively left more descendants than those who invested energy in bodily preservation beyond reproductive years. As a result, traits that protected the body in youth were amplified, while traits that would have preserved function deep into old age were neither favored nor refined. This logic also explains why aging does not strike suddenly. There is no evolutionary advantage to a body that collapses immediately after reproduction, especially in a social species like humans. Older individuals can still contribute knowledge, care, and stability to kin groups. These contributions may indirectly support genetic survival. However, this advantage is diffuse and secondary. It does not exert the same selective force as direct reproduction. Therefore, evolution tolerated gradual decline rather than engineered long-term stability. The body continues functioning, but with less precision. Muscles weaken slowly. Bones lose density over time. Immune responses become less efficient. Each change, taken alone, is modest. Together, they form the pattern we recognize as aging. Crucially, none of these shifts would have significantly reduced reproductive success in ancestral environments, because most individuals would not have lived long enough for the effects to become severe. The absence of strong selection against late-life deterioration allowed these vulnerabilities to persist. Over generations, they became a stable feature of human biology. This becomes clearer when we compare humans to other organisms. Species that reproduce once and die shortly after often show rapid, catastrophic aging. Species that reproduce repeatedly across their lifespan tend to age more gradually. Humans fall into the latter category. Our long childhood and extended learning period require substantial early investment. Energy directed toward brain growth and social development is energy not available for indefinite cellular repair. The body makes a trade that favors adaptability and learning over longevity. This trade made sense in a world where knowledge and cooperation improve survival more than physical endurance alone. Aging, then, is not simply decay. It is the delayed consequence of how energy was allocated early in life. What we experience in later decades is the long shadow of evolutionary choices made under ancient conditions. Modern humans often interpret aging as a problem to be solved, but from an evolutionary standpoint, it is a byproduct of success. The very traits that allowed our ancestors to thrive, reproduce, and expand across diverse environments also ensured that long-term maintenance would remain limited. When we live far beyond the lifespan typical of those ancestors, we encounter the edges of that design. The body continues onward, but without the refinements that only strong evolutionary pressure can produce. Aging reveals where that pressure was never applied. The final piece of this foundation lies in understanding what evolution could not anticipate: Evolution works without foresight. It does not plan for futures that have never existed. It responds only to immediate pressures within a given environment, generation after generation. For early humans, the future rarely extended far beyond early adulthood. Survival into advanced age was exceptional, not because biology enforced a strict limit, but because external forces intervened long before internal limits were reached. Under such conditions, there was no consistent signal for evolution to refine late-life performance. Aging, in this sense, changes that weakened tissues, slowed repair, or reduced resilience later in life did not meaningfully affect reproductive outcomes. They neither improved nor hindered gene transmission in a reliable way. As a result, they persisted unchallenged. Over time, these small, uncorrected vulnerabilities accumulated into the aging process we recognize today. This perspective helps explain why aging feels gradual rather than abrupt. The body does not possess a built-in expiration point. Instead, it carries forward systems that were never pressure tested for extended longevity. When humans began living longer due to cultural, technological, and social advances, they entered biological territory evolution had not mapped. Fire, tools, shared food, social care, and later agriculture and medicine reduced early mortality dramatically. These changes unfolded far faster than genetic adaptation could follow. As a result, modern humans often reach ages where the body is still operating, but no longer optimally supported. The decline we experience is not the failure of a designed system, but the exposure of its original boundaries. Importantly, this does not mean evolution made a mistake. There was no error to correct. Evolution optimized humans for flexibility, learning, cooperation, and rapid response to changing environments. These traits required energy, time, and biological investment early in life. Longevity beyond reproductive and social contribution years remained secondary. The body reflects this hierarchy faithfully. It maintains function as long as it reasonably can, then slowly relinquishes precision. This relinquishment is not programmed destruction. It is the absence of continuous refinement. In ancestral environments, there was no advantage to bodies that stayed perfectly intact for 8 or 9 decades. There was advantage in bodies that adapted quickly, reproduced successfully, and supported offspring long enough to ensure survival. Aging marks the point where evolutionary usefulness gradually fades, not because the individual loses value, but because selection no longer applies pressure. This distinction matters. Aging is not an enemy imposed upon us. It is a consequence of how life persists under constraint. When viewed this way, the human experience of aging becomes less mysterious. We are living into a future our biology was never shaped to expect. Each ache, each slowing process, is not a sign of malfunction, but a reminder of our deep history. The body is doing what it was shaped to do, even as the world around it has moved on. This mismatch between ancient design and modern lifespan sets the stage for the central tension of this video. Evolution moves slowly, responding only across generations. Aging unfolds within a single life. When survival improves faster than biology can adapt, the gap between the two becomes unavoidable. The human body can be understood as a system built to solve short-term problems under constant uncertainty. From the earliest stages of our evolution, survival depended on responding quickly to immediate threats, rather than maintaining stability over long periods. Hunger, predators, injury, and competition demanded rapid action. In this context, a body that could grow fast, heal reasonably well, and reproduce early had a decisive advantage over one designed for endurance decades into the future. The structure of the human body reflects this logic at every level. Growth accelerates rapidly in childhood. Hormonal systems push the body toward maturity with remarkable speed. Muscles strengthen, bones harden, and cognitive abilities expand in a narrow window of time. These changes are not gradual refinements aimed at balance, but forceful investments aimed at readiness. The body prepares itself for the challenges of early adulthood because, in ancestral environments, that was when survival mattered most. Once this phase passes, the urgency fades. From a biological perspective, this shift is neither dramatic nor intentional. It is simply the consequence of how energy is allocated. Every organism operates within limits. Energy used for growth cannot be used for repair. Energy devoted to reproduction cannot be used to preserve tissues indefinitely. In humans, the early emphasis on development and reproduction left fewer resources for long-term cellular upkeep. This trade-off is subtle but persistent. Repair systems exist, but they are calibrated for adequacy, not perfection. They correct damage well enough to sustain function through reproductive years, then gradually fall behind. The body does not stop repairing itself. It simply repairs with less precision over time. This design made sense in a world where few individuals lived long enough for accumulated damage to become critical. In such conditions, the cost of maintaining flawless repair systems throughout life would have outweighed the benefits. Those costs would have reduced early survival or reproductive success, which mattered far more for evolutionary outcomes. As a result, evolution favored bodies that functioned efficiently in the short term, even if that efficiency came at the expense of long-term durability. This short-term orientation can be seen in how human systems respond to stress. When faced with danger or scarcity, the body prioritizes immediate survival. Hormones mobilize energy quickly. Inflammation rises to contain threats. Resources are diverted away from slow-maintenance processes toward urgent response. These mechanisms are effective in the moment, but they leave residue. Repeated over a lifetime, they contribute to gradual wear. Yet evolution did not penalize this wear because it occurred after the period of greatest evolutionary relevance. The body was doing exactly what it had been shaped to do. Importantly, this does not mean the human body is fragile by accident. It is resilient in the ways that once mattered most. Humans evolved remarkable flexibility. We can survive in diverse climates, adapt behavior rapidly, and cooperate socially in complex ways. These abilities required energy-intensive brains and prolonged development. Survival through uncertainty was, as modern humans, we experience the consequences of this design because we have removed many of the external threats that once defined life. We no longer face constant scarcity or predation, but our bodies still operate according to ancient priorities. They remain optimized for short-term survival rather than long-term preservation. Aging, in this light, is not a breakdown of the system. It is the system continuing to operate as it always has, long after the original problems it evolved to solve have faded. This understanding deepens the central question of the video. Humans age faster than evolution, not because evolution failed to keep up, but because the body was never intended to keep pace with extended lifespans. It was intended to get us through the dangers of the present moment, again and again, until the future was no longer relevant to selection. One of the clearest ways to see the short-term logic of the human body is to observe how it manages energy over time. Energy is the fundamental currency of life. Every movement, every thought, every cellular repair draws from a limited supply. Evolution shaped human physiology to spend this energy where it produced the greatest immediate return. In early life, that return came from growth, learning, and reproduction. Muscles strengthened quickly to support movement and labor. The brain consumed a disproportionate share of calories to support learning, memory, and social awareness. Hormonal systems pushed the body toward fertility with urgency. These processes demanded speed and intensity, not patience. Long-term balance mattered less than readiness. Once the body reached maturity, this energetic urgency softened. Growth slowed. Reproductive systems stabilized. What remained was maintenance, a quieter and less visible task. Yet maintenance was never given the same priority as development. Cellular repair mechanisms were designed to keep the system functional, not pristine. DNA repair corrected most errors, but not all. Proteins were replaced regularly, but some damage lingered. Mitochondria continued producing energy, even as their efficiency slowly declined. Each system functioned well enough to support life through the years of greatest evolutionary importance. Beyond that, precision became optional. This pattern is not unique to humans, but it is amplified by our biology. The human brain is especially energy demanding. Even at rest, it consumes a large portion of the body's total energy. Supporting such a brain required trade-offs elsewhere. Energy diverted to cognition was energy unavailable for perfect cellular upkeep. Over time, these small compromises accumulate. They do not announce themselves suddenly. Instead, they emerge gradually as resilience fades. Damage lingers. Systems that once rebounded easily now struggle to return to baseline. From an evolutionary standpoint, this was acceptable. The benefits of advanced cognition and social complexity far outweighed the cost of gradual decline later in life. Another feature of short-term design is redundancy. The body includes overlapping systems that ensure survival when one pathway fails. While redundancy improves short-term resilience, it can mask damage rather than eliminate it. Compensatory mechanisms allow function to continue even as underlying structures degrade. This creates the illusion of stability while quietly increasing long-term strain. Over decades, these hidden costs surface as reduced flexibility and increased vulnerability. Yet evolution did not penalize this outcome because it unfolded beyond the window of strongest selection. Stress itself reveals this priority. When faced with threat, the body shifts resources toward immediate action. Inflammation increases. Repair and regeneration are temporarily set aside. These responses are life-saving in the moment, but repeated exposure to stress over a lifetime accelerates wear. In ancestral environments, stress was intense but intermittent. In modern life, it is often chronic. The body applies the same ancient responses, even when the context has changed. The result is a faster accumulation of damage in systems that were never designed for constant activation. This mismatch does not imply fragility. It reveals specialization. The human body excels at navigating uncertainty in the short term. It is less effective at preserving itself over extended spans of safety and abundance. Aging emerges as the cost of this specialization. It is not a separate process layered onto life, but the slow consequence of priorities set early. When modern humans live far beyond the conditions under which these priorities evolved, they encounter the limits of a body that was built to act first and endure second. This realization brings the central question into sharper focus. Humans age faster than evolution because evolution optimized us for immediacy, not for longevity. The body continues following that logic long after the environment has changed. The final layer of this short-term design becomes clear when we consider how the human body treats time itself. Biological systems do not experience time as humans do. They respond to conditions moment by moment, guided by chemical signals and feedback loops tuned for immediate adjustment. There is no internal clock counting decades or preparing for distant futures. Instead, the body continuously asks a simpler question: what is required right now? For most of human evolutionary history, this question was sufficient. Immediate needs defined survival. The future, beyond the next season or the next generation, carried little biological relevance. As a result, the body develops systems that respond quickly but do not plan far ahead. This absence of long-term foresight is not a flaw, it is an efficient solution to life under uncertainty. In a world where survival is extended far beyond ancestral expectations, the body continues to operate with the same short horizon. Wear accumulates not because the body ignores it, but because it was never shaped to interpret slow damage as urgent. Many age-related changes develop gradually enough to remain beneath biological thresholds for intervention. Cells adapt. Systems compensate. Function continues. Yet beneath this apparent stability, small inefficiencies multiply. Structural proteins lose elasticity. Cellular signaling becomes noisier. Repair pathways respond, but not with the intensity required to fully reverse decades of subtle damage. From an evolutionary standpoint, there was no reason to escalate maintenance beyond a certain point. The costs would have outweighed the benefits during the years that mattered most. Another feature of short-term design is prioritization through competition. Within the body, systems compete for limited resources. When energy is scarce, some functions are preserved while others are reduced. Historically, this hierarchy favored movement, cognition, and reproduction. Long-term tissue preservation ranked lower. Over time, repeated prioritization leaves its mark. Systems that are consistently deprioritized decline earlier and recover more slowly. This pattern does not reflect neglect, but a consistent rule applied over a lifetime. The body always chooses what seems most urgent in the present. As modern humans, we often assume that longevity should naturally follow improved survival. Yet from the body's perspective, survival and longevity are not the same problem. Surviving immediate threats requires rapid, sometimes costly responses. Living for many decades requires sustained, precise maintenance. It had little opportunity to refine the latter. This explains why many aspects of aging appear as threshold effects. For years, function seems stable. Then, seemingly suddenly, resilience declines. In reality, the decline was gradual all along, masked by compensation. When compensatory capacity is finally exceeded, aging becomes visible. The body did not change its strategy. It simply reached the limits of a system designed without long-term planning. This insight reframes the experience of aging. Rather than viewing it as a failure of biology, it can be seen as the natural outcome of a body optimized for responsiveness rather than preservation. Humans evolved to navigate unpredictable environments, not to inhabit extended periods of safety. The modern world has stretched lifespan beyond the range in which short-term strategies remain invisible. We are living inside the consequences of that stretch. Aging, then, is not the body falling behind expectations. It is the body faithfully executing an ancient logic in a new context. This prepares the ground for the next stage of the discussion. If the body was built for short-term survival, and evolution moves slowly across generations, the tension between aging and adaptation becomes unavoidable. The question shifts from why the body declines to why evolution cannot respond quickly enough to this new reality. Aging does not announce its arrival. It does not begin with weakness, pain, or visible decline. It begins quietly. From a biological perspective, the processes associated with aging are active early in life, operating beneath the surface, while growth and vitality dominate attention. Cells divide, tissues expand, and systems mature. But at the same time, small imperfections are already being introduced. DNA replication is highly accurate, yet not flawless. Proteins fold efficiently, but not perfectly. Cellular waste is removed regularly, but not completely. They are normal features of living systems operating under constraints. During youth, the body easily absorbs them. Repair mechanisms are strong. Redundancy compensates for loss. Function remains high, and decline is imperceptible. Evolution shaped this balance deliberately. Early life is when survival and reproduction matter most. The body invests heavily in maintaining performance during these years, even if that means tolerating small inefficiencies that will only matter much later. From the standpoint of natural selection, these inefficiencies are irrelevant as long as they do not interfere with reproduction. As a result, aging-related processes are allowed to begin early, provided their effects remain delayed. This is why aging is not a switch that flips at a certain age. It is a slow accumulation of change that starts as soon as life does. The body is not designed to eliminate all damage. It is designed to manage damage well enough for long enough. This distinction is crucial. Complete prevention of molecular and cellular wear would require enormous energy and complex regulation. In ancestral environments, such investment would have reduced growth, fertility, or survival under stress. Evolution favored a compromise. Tolerate low-level damage early, delay its consequences, and prioritize immediate function. This compromise works remarkably well within the lifespan that evolution shaped. Problems arise only when life extends beyond that span. As humans began living longer due to improved conditions, they carried these early compromises forward into decades for which they were never refined. The damage that once remained harmless now has time to accumulate. Systems that once compensated effectively begin to lose flexibility. The body still functions, but its margins narrow. Importantly, this does not mean aging accelerates suddenly in midlife. The pace may feel faster because compensatory capacity is declining, not because damage suddenly increases. What changes is visibility. Processes that were always present become harder to ignore. This perspective helps explain why attempts to pinpoint a single starting moment for aging are misleading. There is no biological line separating youth from aging. There is only a gradual shift in balance between damage and repair. Early in life, repair outpaces damage by a wide margin. Over time, the margin narrows. Eventually, damage slightly exceeds repair. The crossing of this threshold marks not the beginning of aging, but the moment it becomes apparent. From an evolutionary standpoint, this timing is not accidental. It reflects a design in which decline is delayed until after the period of greatest reproductive and social contribution. Aging, therefore, begins invisibly, woven into the fabric of normal development. It is not an intrusion later in life. It is the long-term consequence of how the body was shaped to function from the start. This realization deepens the central argument of the video. Humans age faster than evolution not because aging suddenly accelerates, but because the processes that lead to aging were allowed to operate quietly for decades, long before evolution had any reason to intervene. As these early processes continue, the body relies heavily on compensation rather than prevention. Compensation is one of the most powerful tools in human biology. When one pathway weakens, another adjusts to maintain overall function. When cells lose efficiency, neighboring cells increase activity. When tissues begin to stiffen, movement patterns adapt. For many years, this capacity masks underlying change. From the outside, the body appears stable, even resilient. Internally, however, balance is becoming more fragile. Each compensatory adjustment carries a cost. It consumes energy, increases strain elsewhere, and reduces the system's ability to respond to future challenges. Evolution favored this strategy because it preserved immediate performance. As long as the organism remained functional during reproductive years, the long-term consequences of compensation remained evolutionarily invisible. Over time, however, compensation itself becomes a source of vulnerability. Systems that are repeatedly asked to do more with less gradually lose reserve. This loss is not uniform across the body. Some tissues, such as skin and blood, renew rapidly and tolerate damage well. Others, like neurons and heart muscle, renew slowly or not at all. Each year adds a small layer of strain. Individually, these changes are negligible. Collectively, they reshape the internal landscape of the body. Importantly, this gradual shift does not signal dysfunction in youth. On the contrary, it reflects remarkable biological efficiency. The body avoids costly over-engineering. It invests just enough in maintenance to remain robust through the years that matter most for survival and reproduction. Beyond that, it accepts decline as a tolerable outcome. This acceptance is not conscious, but encoded through selection across generations. Evolution did not reward organisms that eliminated all late-life vulnerabilities. It rewarded those that balanced performance with efficiency. Another reason aging remains hidden for so long is redundancy at the cellular level. Many systems include backups that allow function to continue despite localized damage. Redundancy increases short-term reliability, but it delays feedback. Damage accumulates without triggering strong corrective responses because overall performance remains adequate. By the time redundancy is exhausted, decline appears sudden, even though it has been unfolding quietly for decades. This is why aging often feels abrupt when it becomes noticeable. As modern humans, we often attribute aging to specific events or behaviors later in life. While environment and lifestyle influence the rate of decline, they do not create aging from nothing. They interact with processes that were already in motion. Early biological compromises set the trajectory. Later experiences shape how quickly that trajectory becomes visible. This distinction matters because it highlights the limits of evolutionary response. Evolution cannot adjust to changes that do not affect reproductive success. Early life compromises persist because they do not reduce the ability to pass on genes. Only when humans began living long enough to experience their full effects did aging emerge as a central concern. By then, the genetic architecture was already in place. Aging, therefore, is not something that starts when the body stops working. It is something that has been managed successfully for decades, until management is no longer sufficient. This understanding reframes the question of speed. Humans do not suddenly age faster at a certain point. Aging feels faster because the buffers that once hid it are gradually depleted. Evolution shaped those buffers to last long enough. When lifespan extends beyond their capacity, decline becomes visible. This quiet depletion prepares the ground for the next discussion. If aging is a slow accumulation masked by compensation, then the apparent mismatch between aging and evolution is rooted not in acceleration, but in exposure. We are seeing processes that were always there, now unfolding in full view. As compensatory capacity continues to decline, another pattern becomes apparent. Aging does not progress evenly across the body. Some systems show strain earlier, while others remain stable for longer. This unevenness is not random. It reflects the different evolutionary histories and repair demands of various tissues. Structures that evolve to endure frequent stress and renewal, such as skin and the lining of the gut, are equipped with robust turnover mechanisms. They tolerate damage well and regenerate continuously. In contrast, tissues that evolve for stability rather than renewal, such as neurons, cardiac muscle, and certain connective tissues, are less replaceable. Early imperfections in these systems persist because replacement is limited or energetically costly. Over time, the gap between systems that can renew and those that cannot becomes more pronounced. This contributes to the familiar pattern of aging, where cognitive processing slows before some physical functions decline, or where cardiovascular strain appears before overt muscular weakness. Evolution accepted these differences because they did not interfere with reproduction. In ancestral environments, the slow decline of non-renewable tissues would rarely have reached a critical threshold. Their vulnerabilities remained latent. As humans live longer, these vulnerabilities emerge more clearly. The body is not failing uniformly. It is revealing the parts that were never designed for indefinite service. This uneven decline also explains why aging is experienced as unpredictable. Two individuals of similar age may show very different patterns of decline, depending on how early compromises, genetic variation, and lifetime stress interacted within specific systems. From an evolutionary perspective, this variability is expected. Selection did not act strongly on late-life performance, so there was little pressure to standardize aging trajectories. Diversity persisted. Aging became a spectrum rather than a script. Importantly, this variability does not mean that aging lacks structure. The underlying logic remains consistent. Systems that contributed less directly to immediate survival or reproduction were allowed to age with fewer safeguards. This prioritization is visible even at the molecular level. Repair enzymes, antioxidant defenses, and quality control mechanisms vary widely between tissues. These differences reflect long-standing evolutionary trade-offs rather than errors. As modern observers, we often interpret uneven aging as malfunction. Yet from the standpoint of deep time, it is a rational outcome. Evolution conserved what mattered most when it mattered most. Everything else was secondary. This perspective also clarifies why medical advances have extended lifespan without proportionally extending health span. By preventing early death, modern interventions allow humans to live long enough for late-life vulnerabilities to manifest. They do not redesign the underlying allocation of biological protection. The body continues to age according to ancient priorities, even as survival improves. Aging becomes more visible, not because it accelerates, but because it is no longer interrupted. This realization sharpens the central argument of the video. Humans age faster than evolution not because the body deteriorates unusually quickly, but because evolution never sculpted uniform, long-term resilience across all systems. The uneven onset of decline is the natural result of selective attention applied early and indifference applied late. Understanding this prepares the listener for the next step in the journey. If aging unfolds early, quietly, and unevenly, then the question of timing becomes critical. How does this slow biological process compare to the pace at which evolution itself can respond? The answer lies in the difference between years and generations. Evolution operates on a timescale that is fundamentally incompatible with the pace of a human life. It moves not in years, but in generations. Small genetic variations appear, are tested by the environment, and either persist or disappear based on their effect on reproduction. This process is slow by design. It requires repeated cycles of birth and death to shape meaningful change. Aging, by contrast, unfolds within a single organism. It progresses year by year, responding to internal wear rather than external selection. When these two processes are placed side by side, the mismatch becomes clear. Evolution cannot react to problems that emerge after reproduction because those problems do not influence which genes are passed on. Aging advances precisely in that blind spot. From the perspective of natural selection, a body that functions well through reproductive years is already successful. Any decline that follows occurs outside the arena where evolution can intervene. This creates a structural delay. By the time aging becomes apparent within an individual, evolution has no mechanism to adjust. It can only respond if aging interferes with reproduction across generations. For most of human history, it did not. Lifespans were short, and late-life decline rarely shaped reproductive outcomes. As a result, the genetic architecture that governs aging remained largely unchanged. This difference in timing explains why aging feels relentless, while evolution appears inert. Aging is continuous and personal. Evolution is discontinuous and impersonal. One unfolds within the boundaries of a life. The other unfolds across populations over centuries. They do not meet at the same scale. When conditions change rapidly, this gap widens. Humans altered their environment faster than their biology could follow. Improvements in shelter, nutrition, social organization, and later medicine reduced early mortality dramatically. In evolutionary terms, this change occurred almost instantaneously. A few thousand years is negligible on the timescale of genetic adaptation. The body entered a new regime of longevity without the corresponding evolutionary adjustments. Aging, once truncated by external dangers, now had time to fully express itself. Evolution did not accelerate to match this change, because the forces that drive it remained the same. Selection still favors traits that improve early life survival and reproduction. Extended lifespan alone does not exert strong selective pressure unless it enhances reproductive success. In many cases, it does not. This reveals a fundamental constraint. Evolution cannot respond to the experience of aging within individuals. It can only respond to patterns of reproduction across populations. Even if aging causes suffering or loss later in life, those effects are evolutionarily silent unless they alter reproductive outcomes. The speed of aging, therefore, is not something evolution can easily slow. It is governed by processes already in place. Modern humans often expect progress to be cumulative and responsive. We assume that problems, once recognized, should gradually disappear. Evolution does not work this way. It does not respond to recognition, only to selection. Aging persists because it remains largely invisible to the criteria that drive genetic change. This is why the gap between aging and evolution grows wider. As lifespan extends, the longer humans live, the more clearly they experience processes that evolution never addressed. This gap is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of constraint. Evolution is bound by its own rules. It cannot redesign the body in response to late-life challenges unless those challenges affect reproductive success. Aging unfolds freely within this limitation. Understanding this constraint reframes the central question of the video. Humans age faster than they evolve, not because evolution is slow in a general sense, but because it is slow in a very specific way. It is locked to reproduction. Aging moves independently, governed by cellular time rather than generational time. As long as these clocks remain unsynchronized, aging will continue to outpace adaptation. This realization sets the stage for examining how modern conditions amplify this mismatch even further. To see how this temporal mismatch deepens, it is necessary to consider how quickly human environments have changed compared to the pace of genetic adaptation. For most of our species' existence, environmental shifts were gradual. Climate changed over thousands of years, diets evolved slowly, social structures adapted across many generations. Under these conditions, evolution had time to respond. Small genetic adjustments could spread through populations, aligning biology with environment closely enough to sustain survival and reproduction. Aging remained largely hidden because few individuals lived long enough for its full effects to emerge. This balance began to break when cultural change accelerated. The use of tools, fire, and cooperative care reduced early mortality. Still later, sanitation, medicine, and technology transformed survival within a few centuries. In evolutionary terms, these changes happened almost instantly. The human body entered an environment radically different from the one in which it evolved, without the genetic updates that such a transition would normally require. Aging, once constrained by external danger, now unfolded fully within extended lifespans. Evolution did not keep pace because it could not. The mechanisms that drive genetic change remained unchanged, even as the world transformed around them. This creates a situation where biological processes shaped for one context are expressed in another. Aging is not new. What is new is the length of time over which it is allowed to operate. Modern humans often interpret this as acceleration. In reality, the underlying pace of aging has not dramatically increased. What has increased is exposure. Decades that once lay beyond reach are now lived through, revealing gradual declines that were always present but previously unseen. Evolution does not respond to exposure alone. It responds to selection. As long as extended lifespan does not consistently enhance reproductive success, it exerts little pressure on genetic change. In many modern societies, reproduction occurs earlier than the ages at which aging becomes limiting. Thus, the traits governing late-life decline remain evolutionarily neutral. The body continues to age according to ancient rules, while culture continues to extend life beyond those rules. Another layer of this mismatch lies in the separation between survival and reproduction. Modern humans can survive long after their reproductive years end. In ancestral environments, survival and reproduction were tightly linked. To survive was often to reproduce. Today, survival can be decoupled from genetic contribution. This decoupling removes one of the few pathways through which evolution could respond to aging. Longevity without reproduction does not feed back into selection. Even if individuals live longer and experience aging-related decline, those experiences do not shape the genetic future of the population. Evolution remains indifferent. This indifference is not moral or neglectful. It is structural. Evolution has no mechanism to value extended experience, accumulated wisdom, or late-life contribution unless these directly influence reproductive success. Human societies may value these things deeply, but genetic selection does not. This difference in values further widens the gap between biological adaptation and lived reality. As culture advances, expectations of health and longevity rise. Biology remains anchored to reproductive timing. Aging becomes more visible, more frustrating, and more central to human concern. Yet it remains largely untouched by evolutionary adjustment. Understanding this dynamic clarifies why aging appears to outpace evolution so dramatically in modern times. It is not that evolution slowed down. It is that human environments sped up. The body is expressing processes calibrated for a different tempo of change. This realization prepares the ground for the next step in the argument. If evolution cannot respond to rapid cultural shifts, and aging unfolds within the space those shifts create, then the modern world itself becomes a force that exposes biological limits rather than reshaping them. The final aspect of this mismatch appears when we consider expectation. Humans are uniquely capable of imagining futures beyond their biological design. We plan decades ahead, invest in long-term goals, and assume continuity between present effort and future reward. This ability evolved to support cooperation and learning, not to synchronize biology with extended lifespan. As a result, there is a growing gap between what humans expect from their bodies and what those bodies were shaped to deliver. It does not respond to disappointment, discomfort, or unfulfilled plans. It responds only to reproductive outcomes. Aging unfolds independently of human intention, revealing a tension between foresight and biological constraint. In ancestral contexts, this tension was minimal. Few individuals lived long enough to confront it. Today, it is nearly universal. The body ages according to ancient timing, while the mind projects itself far beyond that timing. This creates the impression that aging is premature or unfair. Another consequence of expectation is the belief that adaptation should follow need. Humans often assume that because longer life is now common, evolution should gradually adjust to support it. This assumption misunderstands how selection operates. Need alone does not drive genetic change. Only differential reproduction does. Even widespread aging-related decline does not shape evolution unless it alters who reproduces and how successfully. In modern societies, reproduction is influenced more by culture, choice, and technology than by late-life physical condition. As a result, aging remains largely disconnected from the forces that could modify it genetically. Evolution continues to refine early life traits while leaving late-life processes untouched. This reinforces the sense that aging is racing ahead while evolution stands still. In reality, each is moving at its natural pace, governed by different rules. The modern world intensifies this perception by reducing early mortality to historically unprecedented levels. Humans now survive long enough to experience the full expression of biological limits without the buffering effect of earlier death. Aging is no longer truncated. It is revealed in full. Evolution does not respond to revelation. It responds to selection. As long as survival beyond reproduction does not alter genetic transmission, the mismatch remains. This understanding reframes the emotional experience of aging. The frustration many feel arises not from biological failure, but from misaligned expectations. We expect bodies to match the temporal horizon of the mind. Evolution never promised this alignment. It built bodies for survival and reproduction under uncertainty. not for sustained performance across many decades of safety. Recognizing this does not eliminate the challenges of aging, but it clarifies their origin. Aging is not accelerating because evolution is neglectful. It feels faster because human life has expanded into a temporal space biology was never required to fill. This completes the argument of Truk 4. The speed difference between aging and evolution is not a defect to be corrected, but a structural feature of how life adapts. Aging unfolds within individuals. Evolution responds across generations. When cultural change compresses centuries into lifetimes, the two inevitably fall out of step. This prepares the listener for the next transition. If modern conditions amplify this mismatch, then the cost of uniquely human traits must be examined next, beginning with the organ that defines our species most clearly, the brain. The human brain represents one of the most consequential evolutionary trade-offs in our history. It is the organ that allowed language, culture, planning, and cooperation to flourish. But it is also one of the most expensive structures the body has ever carried. From early development onward, the brain demands a continuous and disproportionate share of energy. Even at rest, it consumes far more resources than any other organ relative to its size. This demand shaped the entire architecture of the human body. To support a large, complex brain, energy had to be redirected from other systems. Growth slowed in some areas. Muscle mass was moderated. Long-term cellular maintenance became secondary. These trade-offs were not optional. They were necessary for the survival strategy humans adopted. A species that relies on learning, memory, and social coordination must pay for those abilities biologically. The payment was made early, through altered priorities in development and maintenance. Childhood in humans became unusually long. Years were devoted to brain growth, learning, and social integration. During this period, the body invests heavily in neural development while postponing full physical maturity. This extended childhood improved adaptability and cooperation, but it also meant that resources were tied up for longer before reproduction could occur. Evolution accepted this delay because the benefits of advanced cognition outweighed the risks. However, the cost of this strategy did not disappear. It was deferred. Energy spent building and sustaining a large brain could not be spent building a body optimized for indefinite repair. As a result, the systems responsible for long-term maintenance were calibrated to support cognitive function rather than compete with it. The brain was protected. Other tissues were allowed to age. This hierarchy persists throughout life. When resources become limited, the body prioritizes neural function. Blood flow, glucose availability, and oxygen delivery are preserved for the brain, even if other systems experience strain. This prioritization supports cognition and awareness, but it accelerates wear elsewhere. Over decades, the cumulative effect becomes apparent. The body weakens, while the mind often remains comparatively active, at least initially. This imbalance contributes to the experience of aging as a physical decline that outpaces cognitive intent. Importantly, this was not an oversight. It was a successful evolutionary strategy. Humans survived not by outlasting predators physically, but by outthinking them. The brain enabled planning, tool use, and cooperation, reducing immediate threats and increasing reproductive success. Longevity beyond these functions remained incidental. Evolution refined the brain relentlessly, while leaving the body's long-term durability relatively coarse. Aging reflects this asymmetry. The brain itself is not immune to aging, but it was given greater protection early in life. Neuronal systems are supported by specialized maintenance and redundancy, allowing function to persist despite gradual damage. Other tissues lack comparable safeguards. The result is a body that increasingly struggles to support the organ that once justified its sacrifices. This dynamic deepens the central theme of the video. Humans age faster than they evolve because the traits that defined our success required immediate Energy-intensive investment. The brain demanded priority. The cost was paid slowly, across decades, in the form of reduced physical resilience. Understanding this trade-off shifts the question away from why the body declines and toward what it was built to serve. Aging emerges as the long-term consequence of choosing intelligence over endurance. As the brain continued to expand and specialize, its influence reached beyond energy consumption and into the timing of the human life cycle itself. A long childhood is not merely a developmental phase. It is an evolutionary commitment. Humans spend an unusually large portion of their lives learning how to survive within complex social and environmental systems. During these years, the brain is plastic, absorbing language, customs, skills, and social rules. This prolonged dependency increases vulnerability early in life, but it also creates adults capable of remarkable adaptation. Evolution accepted this risk because the payoff was immense. However, the extension of childhood compressed other phases of life. Reproduction was delayed. Physical maturity arrived later. The window in which the body could both reproduce and maintain peak physical condition narrowed. This compression intensified the trade-offs already present. Energy that might have been allocated toward reinforcing tissues for long-term durability was instead spent sustaining brain development and learning over many years. The body became a support system for cognition rather than an end in itself. When adulthood finally arrives, the body enters it having already carried years of energetic burden. Maintenance systems have functioned adequately, but they have also accumulated strain. The brain, meanwhile, continues to demand consistent support. Even subtle disruptions in blood flow, metabolism, or oxygen delivery threaten cognitive function, so the body preserves these pathways at all costs. Other systems absorb the deficit. Musculoskeletal tissues, connective structures, and metabolic reserves gradually yield. This pattern becomes more pronounced as aging progresses. The body is asked to continue supporting an organ that remains energetically expensive, even as overall efficiency declines. Over time, this imbalance contributes to the familiar experience of physical aging paired with mental continuity. Many individuals feel cognitively intact while their bodies lag behind. This is not accidental. It reflects a hierarchy established early in our evolutionary history. The brain was always the priority. Another consequence of prolonged brain-centered development is the accumulation of experience. Humans rely heavily on learned strategies rather than instinct alone. This reliance reduces the need for physical robustness in early adulthood. Knowledge can substitute for strength. Cooperation can substitute for endurance. As long as these strategies remain effective, the body can afford to be less durable. Physical decline later in life did not undermine survival in youth or reproduction in early adulthood, because accumulated knowledge and social roles could compensate. Elders contributed through memory and guidance rather than physical labor. This contribution supported kin groups without requiring peak bodily performance. As a result, evolution tolerated aging-related physical decline as long as cognitive and social function remained sufficient. The long-term cost of this tolerance becomes evident only when individuals live far beyond the period in which cognitive compensation remains effective. As physical decline continues, neural repair, while prioritized, is not limitless. Over decades, the same principles that apply to other tissues apply to the brain as well. Damage accumulates, plasticity decreases, compensation becomes harder. The difference lies in timing. The brain was given more time, not immunity. This staggered decline reinforces the perception that the body ages before the mind, even though both follow the same underlying logic. This deepens the central argument. Humans age faster than they evolve because the evolutionary path that favored intelligence required long preparation and sustained investment. The benefits were immediate and profound. The costs were deferred and gradual. Aging reflects the moment when deferred costs begin to surface. It is not the failure of a strategy, but its long-term consequence. Choosing intelligence reshaped the human life course. Longevity beyond functional contribution remained secondary. The body continues to bear that choice quietly, long after its benefits have been realized. The final dimension of this trade-off becomes visible when we consider how the brain changes the meaning of survival itself. Strength, speed, and endurance determine outcomes directly. For humans, survival became increasingly cognitive. Anticipation, memory, planning, and cooperation reduced the need for constant physical exertion. This shift altered the selective landscape. Traits that enhanced problem-solving and social coordination improved survival far more reliably than traits that extended bodily durability. Evolution followed this signal. It refined neural systems aggressively while allowing the body's long-term maintenance to remain approximate. The result was a species that could solve problems faster than its biology could adapt. This cognitive advantage reshaped risk. Humans learned to avoid danger rather than withstand it. Tools replaced claws. Shelters replaced fur. Fire replaced metabolic heat. Each innovation reduced immediate physical demands while increasing reliance on knowledge. As reliance on cognition grew, the selective pressure on bodily endurance weakened. It needed to be sufficiently functional while the brain carried the adaptive load. This redistribution of responsibility left a lasting mark on aging. Physical decline became tolerable earlier because survival no longer depended on peak physical performance. Cognitive continuity compensated. This compensation masked the cost of reduced bodily maintenance for many years. However, compensation has limits. Knowledge and planning can delay exposure to danger, but they cannot reverse biological wear. Over time, the body's reduced investment in long-term repair becomes apparent. Muscles lose resilience, joints stiffen, metabolic regulation becomes less flexible. These changes do not immediately threaten survival in a protected environment, but they accumulate. The brain continues to generate intention, expectation, and identity, while the body gradually loses the capacity to execute them fully. This divergence contributes to the modern experience of aging as a mismatch between inner continuity and outer decline. From an evolutionary perspective, this mismatch was acceptable. Selection favored minds that could adapt rapidly, even if bodies aged gradually. The benefits of intelligence were realized early and reliably. The costs of physical decline were delayed and variable. As long as reproduction occurred before those costs became prohibitive, evolution had no reason to rebalance the system. The brain's success ensured the body's limitations remained evolutionarily invisible. This invisibility persisted until lifespan expanded far enough to expose the long tail of deferred maintenance. The brain did not evolve to anticipate this exposure. It evolved to exploit immediate opportunities. As modern humans live into advanced ages, the same cognitive systems that once ensured survival now confront limitations they were never meant to solve. The brain can imagine futures the body cannot support indefinitely. This gap is not a malfunction. It is the consequence of a strategy that prioritized rapid adaptation over sustained preservation. Aging reveals the price of that priority. Importantly, this does not diminish the value of the brain-centered path humans took. It explains it. The success of our species rests on the ability to change behavior faster than biology can change structure. That success required accepting long-term biological costs. Aging is one of those costs. It is the slow repayment of energy and protection diverted toward cognition and culture. Understanding this reframes the central question once more. Humans age faster than they evolve because evolution invested heavily in traits that paid off immediately. The brain delivered those payoffs. The body absorbed the debt. As time extends, the debt becomes visible. This prepares the listener to move beyond individual organs and examine how these trade-offs scale across societies and environments, where modern life further magnifies the consequences of ancient choices. Modern human life unfolds in an environment that no longer resembles the conditions under which our biology was shaped. For most of our evolutionary history, daily life imposed constant physical demands and frequent scarcity. Movement was unavoidable. Food intake fluctuated. Rest followed exertion naturally. Under these conditions, the body's short-term survival design functioned as intended. Stress was intense but intermittent. Recovery followed challenge. Aging progressed quietly, often interrupted by external causes long before it became limiting. In the modern world, this rhythm has been altered. Physical danger has diminished, but biological systems continue to respond as if it were present. The body still deploys stress responses designed for acute threats, even when the challenges are abstract, prolonged, or social in nature. This change does not introduce new biology. It reveals old biology operating in unfamiliar territory. The result is a subtle but persistent acceleration of wear. Stress hormones mobilize energy repeatedly without corresponding physical release. Inflammatory responses activate without clear resolution. Repair mechanisms are postponed again and again. None of these responses are inherently harmful. They are adaptive in short bursts. Over long spans, however, they impose cumulative strain on systems already calibrated for limited maintenance. This strain exposes the gap between ancient design and modern context. The body continues to act as if survival depends on immediate readiness, even when threats no longer demand it. Evolution did not anticipate environments in which psychological pressure could persist without physical resolution. As a result, the same mechanisms that once ensured survival now contribute to gradual depletion. This does not mean modern life is uniquely damaging. It means modern life extends the operation of short-term systems far beyond their original scope. Another feature of modern environments is abundance without alignment. Food is readily available, but not always in forms that match ancestral metabolism. Rest is possible, but often disconnected from physical fatigue. Movement is optional rather than necessary. These shifts remove natural feedback loops that once regulated energy use and repair. The body evolved to balance intake and expenditure through necessity. When necessity fades, regulation becomes less precise. Energy is stored rather than cycled. Systems designed to respond to scarcity operate in conditions of surplus. Over time, this mismatch increases metabolic strain and reduces flexibility. Aging processes that once unfolded slowly now encounter fewer interruptions. Again, evolution does not adjust in response to discomfort or inefficiency. It adjusts only when reproduction is affected. Modern environments allow individuals to reproduce successfully long before these mismatches impose severe costs. As a result, the underlying biology remains unchanged. Aging unfolds in a context that amplifies its visibility. The body is not failing faster. It is being asked to operate under conditions that highlight its limits. Importantly, this exposure is uneven. Some individuals adapt behaviorally in ways that partially restore ancestral rhythms. Others do not. Variation increases. Aging becomes more heterogeneous. From an evolutionary perspective, this variation is inconsequential, as long as reproduction proceeds. From a lived perspective, it is profound. Modern humans feel the consequences of a biology stretched beyond its original range. This tension deepens the central argument of the video. Humans age faster than they evolve because cultural change has expanded the temporal and environmental space in which aging unfolds, without altering the biological rules that govern it. The modern world does not create aging. It allows aging to express itself more fully and more continuously. Understanding this shift prepares the listener to examine how specific features of modern life interact with ancient repair systems, beginning with how the body manages damage when repair is repeatedly delayed. The way the body handles damage becomes increasingly strained. Molecules break down, cells experience stress, and tissues undergo micro-injuries simply through normal use. In ancestral environments, damage and repair were closely linked. Physical exertion was followed by rest. Scarcity alternated with abundance. Stress resolved through action or recovery. These cycles allowed repair systems to function within their intended rhythm. In modern life, the rhythm is disrupted. Damage continues to occur, but opportunities for full repair are often delayed or fragmented. The body remains in a state of partial readiness, neither fully engaged nor fully restored. This state places unique pressure on systems that were designed for clear transitions between effort and recovery. Repair processes, which require time, energy, and stability, are repeatedly postponed. Over years, this postponement accumulates. The body does not collapse. It adapts by lowering expectations. Repair becomes less thorough. Inflammation becomes more persistent. Cellular cleanup processes operate, but with reduced efficiency. These adjustments preserve short-term function while increasing long-term wear. From an evolutionary perspective, this adaptation is acceptable. The organism remains capable of survival and reproduction. The costs appear later. Modern life extends the duration over which this compromised balance operates. Decades pass in which the body maintains function under continuous low-level strain. Aging becomes the record of that strain. Importantly, this process does not require extreme conditions. It emerges from ordinary routines sustained over long periods. Small delays in recovery compound. Minor inefficiencies persist. Systems that once relied on periodic reset now operate without one. The body adjusts, but adjustment is not the same as restoration. Another consequence of modern environments is the reduction of biological signals that once guided repair. Hunger, exhaustion, and physical danger provided clear cues for energy allocation. Today, these signals are often muted or replaced by abstract indicators. The body responds to perceived stress without clear resolution. Hormonal cycles remain activated longer than intended. Repair pathways are interrupted by repeated alerts. Over time, this erodes the distinction between challenge and recovery. Aging accelerates not because damage increases dramatically, but because repair is rarely complete. Evolution did not prepare the body for environments in which partial stress could persist indefinitely. It prepared it for fluctuation. The absence of fluctuation becomes its own form of strain. This dynamic explains why aging in modern contexts often feels diffuse rather than localized. No single system fails outright. Instead, resilience declines across multiple systems simultaneously. The body remains functional but less adaptable. Small challenges take longer to resolve. Recovery is incomplete. Each year adds another layer to this pattern. The body carries forward the memory of unresolved strain in its tissues and cells. This memory is not conscious. It is encoded in altered thresholds, reduced reserve, and slower response. From an evolutionary standpoint, none of this triggers correction. Reproductive success remains unaffected. Modern humans experience the result as premature aging, even though the underlying biology has not changed its pace. What has changed is duration. Life now extends long enough for the consequences of incomplete repair to become unavoidable. Humans age faster than they evolve because the modern world sustains conditions that expose biological limits without applying evolutionary pressure to remove them. The body adapts locally and temporarily, but evolution cannot follow. Understanding this sets the stage for examining the repair systems themselves and why they were never designed to operate indefinitely under continuous demand. The final effect of modern life emerges when we examine how extended stability alters the meaning of resilience. In ancestral environments, resilience meant the ability to withstand sudden shocks and recover quickly. Survival depended on responding to clear, immediate challenges. Modern environments reduce the frequency of such shocks while extending periods of low-level demand. This shift changes how biological systems are stressed. Instead of acute challenges followed by recovery, the body experiences prolonged, ambiguous pressure. Systems remain active without resolution. This pattern erodes resilience in a different way. It does not overwhelm the body suddenly. It slowly narrows its capacity to respond. Over time, the range of conditions the body can handle shrinks. Small disruptions produce outsized effects. Recovery takes longer. The margin for error diminishes. This erosion is subtle, but cumulative. It reflects a biology designed for fluctuation operating in a context of continuity. Repair systems, which evolved to address clear damage after clear stress, are repeatedly interrupted by ongoing demands. They adapt by operating at a lower level of intensity. This preserves function but reduces depth of repair. The body becomes stable, but fragile. It appears robust until it is challenged beyond its reduced reserve. This fragility is often mistaken for accelerated aging. In reality, it is reduced buffering capacity. Evolution did not shape systems to maintain maximal reserve under constant low-level strain. It shaped them to mobilize reserve when needed and replenish it afterward. Modern life rarely provides full replenishment. As a result, reserve declines. Aging reflects the gradual loss of this reserve. Another consequence of extended stability is the weakening of signals that once triggered rest and recovery. In ancestral contexts, exhaustion, forced cessation, injury-imposed immobility. These signals created natural pauses that allowed deep repair. Modern life often bypasses these signals. Fatigue can be overridden. Injury can be compensated for. Scarcity is rare. The body receives fewer unambiguous instructions to enter full recovery. Without these signals, repair remains partial. The cumulative effect becomes visible only after years or decades. From an evolutionary perspective, this scenario is novel. Extended stability was not a common condition. Selection did not act on organisms living in prolonged safety with persistent low-level demand. As a result, no biological refinements exist to manage it efficiently. The body responds as best it can, but its responses are improvised. Aging becomes the trace of this improvisation. The body maintains function by sacrificing reserve. Once reserve is gone, decline becomes apparent. This understanding reframes how modern humans perceive aging. It is not that life has become more damaging. It is that life has become less interruptive. Aging is no longer truncated by external events. It unfolds continuously. The modern world stretches biological processes across longer spans without resetting them. Evolution remains unable to respond because reproduction proceeds successfully despite these changes. The genetic framework remains fixed while lived experience expands. This completes Truck 6. Modern life does not cause aging, but it magnifies its expression by removing the natural interruptions that once concealed it. The body continues to operate according to ancient rules, but under new conditions that reveal their limits. This prepares the discussion to move inward, toward the repair systems themselves, and to ask a deeper question. If damage is constant and repair is incomplete, why were the repair systems never designed to do more? The human body possesses intricate repair systems that operate continuously from the moment life begins. DNA repair enzymes correct errors during replication. Cellular quality control mechanisms remove damaged components. Immune responses identify and neutralize threats. At first glance, these systems appear remarkably sophisticated, even generous. Yet they share a defining feature. None of them are designed to achieve perfection. They are designed to achieve sufficiency. Repair systems evolved to maintain function within the window that mattered most for survival and reproduction. Beyond that window, their performance gradually declines, not because they fail outright, but because they were never selected to do more. This distinction is essential. Perfect repair would require constant monitoring, flawless correction, and immense energy expenditure. In ancestral environments, Such investment would have reduced early survival or reproductive success. Evolution favored repair that was good enough rather than exhaustive. This strategy preserved immediate fitness while accepting long-term cost. The body fixes what threatens short-term function and tolerates what does not. Small molecular errors that do not disrupt early life performance are left uncorrected. Over time, these tolerated errors accumulate. The result is aging. Importantly, repair systems are not static. They are regulated according to perceived urgency. When damage threatens immediate survival, repair intensifies. When damage accumulates slowly and diffusely, repair remains partial. This regulatory logic reflects evolutionary priorities. Systems respond vigorously to acute danger and modestly to gradual change. Aging-related damage unfolds too slowly to trigger maximal response. By then, accumulated damage exceeds the capacity of systems calibrated for moderation. Another constraint lies in trade-offs between repair and growth. As growth slows, repair remains active but less prioritized. Energy is diverted toward reproduction and maintenance of established structures rather than continual renewal. Repair continues, but its depth diminishes. Cells are replaced, but not perfectly. Tissues are maintained, but not restored to original condition. This gradual shift reflects a strategic reallocation rather than decline. Evolution favored organisms that could balance these competing demands efficiently in youth, not those that could preserve youth indefinitely. Repair systems also face diminishing returns. As damage accumulates, repair becomes more complex and less effective. Correcting one error may introduce another. Clearing damaged components may stress surrounding structures. Over time, the cost of repair rises while its benefits decline. Evolution did not refine systems to operate indefinitely under these conditions because there was no consistent advantage in doing so. Individuals rarely lived long enough for diminishing returns to dominate outcomes. Thus, repair systems were shaped to function robustly for a limited span, then gradually lose precision. This loss is not a malfunction. It is the expected trajectory of systems designed under constraint. Modern humans often imagine aging as a failure of repair. In reality, aging is the cumulative expression of repair operating within its original design limits. The systems continue to work. They simply work less thoroughly as time extends beyond the range for which they were optimized. This understanding reframes the central question yet again. Humans age faster than they evolve, because the repair systems that govern aging were never targets of strong selection for late-life performance. They were shaped to protect early life function efficiently, not to guarantee long-term preservation. Aging is the footprint of this design. It marks the boundary between what repair systems were built to handle and what extended lifespan now demands. A deeper look at repair systems reveals another limitation. Repair itself can create instability. Every corrective action carries risk. When DNA is repaired, strands are cut and rejoined. When damaged proteins are removed, replacements must be synthesized and integrated. When cells are cleared, neighboring cells must divide or reorganize to fill the gap. Each step restores function, but each step also introduces opportunity for error. Evolution balanced this risk carefully. Excessive repair could destabilize systems just as much as insufficient repair. As a result, repair pathways evolved with thresholds. They activate strongly when damage threatens immediate function and remain restrained when damage is diffuse and gradual. Aging-related damage falls into the latter category. It accumulates quietly, rarely crossing the thresholds that would trigger aggressive intervention. This restraint preserves short-term stability. Another constraint lies in the coordination of repair across systems. The human body is not a collection of independent parts. Repair in one tissue affects others. Increasing repair activity globally would demand more energy, generate more byproducts, and raise systemic stress. Evolution avoided this scenario by limiting repair intensity. Instead of striving for global renewal, the body prioritizes local fixes, where failure would be catastrophic. This approach maintains overall function but sacrifices long-term coherence. Over decades, systems drift slightly out of alignment. Regulatory signals become noisier, timing becomes less precise. Repair continues, but coordination weakens. Aging reflects this gradual loss of synchrony rather than the collapse of any single system. This is especially evident in tissues with low turnover. Neurons, for example, rely heavily on maintenance rather than replacement. Their repair mechanisms emphasize preservation over renewal. Small disruptions accumulate because replacement is not an option. Repair slows to avoid destabilizing established networks. Over time, these cautious strategies preserve function at the cost of adaptability. Evolution favored stability over rejuvenation because stability supported learning and memory during reproductive years. Late-life rigidity was an acceptable trade-off. A similar pattern appears in connective tissues and structural proteins. These components provide mechanical integrity, but they renew slowly. Repair focuses on patching rather than rebuilding. Each patch preserves function, but slightly alters structure. Over many years, the accumulation of patches changes material properties. Tissues become stiffer, less resilient, and more prone to injury. This outcome was not penalized evolutionarily because it emerged late and gradually. Repair systems did what they were designed to do: prevent sudden failure, not preserve youthful properties indefinitely. Another reason repair systems remain limited is the risk of uncontrolled growth. Aggressive repair often involves increased cell division. Increased division raises the risk of errors that can disrupt regulation. Evolution constrained repair partly to minimize this risk. It is safer to tolerate gradual decline than to risk instability that could compromise early life survival. This conservative strategy protected reproduction and reduced catastrophic outcomes. Aging, from this perspective, is the cost of safety. Repair systems err on the side of restraint. They preserve order at the expense of renewal. Modern humans experience the long-term result of this restraint as decline. Yet, the underlying logic remains sound. Evolution optimized repair for reliability within a finite window, not for perpetual renewal. This reinforces the central argument. Humans age faster than they evolve because the systems responsible for preventing aging were intentionally limited. They were shaped to avoid instability, conserve energy, and protect early life function. Extended lifespan reveals the consequences of those limits. Repair continues, but always within boundaries that evolution never had reason to push further. The final limitation of repair systems emerges when we consider how evolution evaluates success. Repair is not judged by how long it preserves youth, but by how reliably it supports reproduction and early life function. From this perspective, repair systems that allow gradual decline are not suboptimal, they are sufficient. Evolution does not reward perfection. It rewards consistency under relevant conditions. As long as repair keeps the organism functional through the years that matter for gene transmission, it has done its job. Any additional preservation beyond that point offers diminishing evolutionary return. This principle explains why repair systems often plateau rather than improve with age. Early in life, repair capacity is high because growth and reproduction depend on it. Later, repair remains active but does not scale to meet accumulating damage. The system was never selected to recalibrate itself indefinitely. It operates according to parameters set during development, not according to future need. Aging reflects the widening gap between fixed repair capacity and growing repair demand. Another consequence of this design is irreversibility. Many repair processes are one-directional. They remove damage but do not restore original structure perfectly. Once structural complexity is lost, it is rarely rebuilt in full. This is especially true in tissues where architecture is critical for function. The body prioritizes continuity over restoration. It preserves what remains rather than recreating what was. This approach minimizes disruption but limits rejuvenation. Over time, cumulative loss becomes apparent. The body ages not because repair stops, but because repair preserves function without preserving youth. Evolution accepted this outcome because youthful properties were not required indefinitely. This perspective also clarifies why late-life interventions often struggle to reverse aging. Repair systems are deeply integrated into regulatory networks established early in life. Pushing them beyond their evolved limits risks destabilizing those networks. Evolution constrained these systems to avoid such risk. The body resists radical renewal because it was never selected to tolerate it. Stability took precedence over flexibility. Aging, therefore, is not the failure of repair, but the success of a conservative strategy applied beyond its intended time frame. Modern humans often interpret this conservatism as limitation. From an evolutionary standpoint, it was protection. Repair systems that were too aggressive would have introduced variability and risk that threatened early survival. By limiting repair, evolution ensured reliable reproduction across generations. The cost of this reliability is gradual decline later in life. When lifespan extends, the cost becomes visible. The body continues to follow its original rules, even as those rules become less compatible with extended longevity. This completes Truck 7. Repair systems were never meant to erase time. They were meant to manage it efficiently for as long as evolution required. Aging is the mark of time managed within constraint. It is not something evolution failed to solve. It is something evolution had no reason to solve further. This understanding prepares the transition toward the next phase of the discussion. If repair systems are limited by design, then longevity itself must be reconsidered not as an evolutionary goal, but as an unintended side effect of changes that occurred outside biology. Longevity in humans did not emerge because evolution decided to extend life. It emerged because external conditions changed. For most of our history, lifespan was limited not by internal biology, but by external hazards. Injury, infection, starvation, and exposure ended lives long before aging could fully unfold. When these pressures eased, lifespan expanded without any corresponding redesign of the body. This distinction is essential. Living longer is not the same as aging more slowly. Evolution did not recalibrate repair systems, energy allocation, or long-term maintenance when survival improved. It simply allowed more individuals to reach ages that were previously rare. Longevity, in this sense, is an outcome of circumstance rather than intention. It is a side effect of safety, not a product of selection. This explains why increased lifespan often reveals vulnerability rather than resilience. The body reaches ages for which it was never optimized. Aging processes that once remained incomplete now run their course. From an evolutionary standpoint, nothing new has occurred. The same biology is operating over a longer span. The difference lies in exposure. This exposure creates the impression that aging has accelerated, when in reality it has been unmasked. Another way to see this is to compare lifespan extension across history. Early improvements in survival dramatically increased average lifespan, largely by reducing childhood mortality. Adults did not suddenly age more slowly. More children simply lived long enough to become adults. Later improvements extended life further by managing disease and injury. Again, the underlying rate of biological aging remained largely unchanged. What changed was the probability of reaching advanced age. Longevity increased without altering the mechanisms that govern decline. This pattern holds across societies and eras. Where survival improves, lifespan extends. Where survival worsens, lifespan contracts. The biology of aging remains remarkably consistent. This consistency reveals the limits of evolutionary influence. Evolution shaped the body to function reliably through early and middle adulthood under uncertain conditions. It did not shape it to perform indefinitely under stable ones. When stability arrives through culture and technology, Longevity increases by default. Aging follows the same trajectory, only longer. This is why extended lifespan often comes with extended periods of frailty rather than prolonged youth. The systems responsible for maintaining youthful function were never expanded to match the new temporal horizon. Another implication of longevity as a side effect is inequality of outcome. Because extended life is not biologically engineered, individuals experience it differently. Genetic variation, early development, and lifetime exposure shape how aging unfolds. Evolution did not standardize these outcomes because late-life performance did not matter for selection. As a result, longevity reveals diversity rather than uniformity. Some bodies cope better with extended time, others struggle earlier. This variability is not noise. It is the expected result of a system never refined for late-life consistency. Understanding longevity in this way reframes the central argument. Humans age faster than they evolve because longevity expanded without evolutionary support. Life grew longer, but biology did not grow deeper. Aging is not something that evolution overlooked. It is something that longevity exposed. Recognizing this prepares the listener to question a common assumption that living longer must represent evolutionary progress. If longevity is a side effect rather than a goal, then its meaning must be examined more carefully. When longevity is understood as a side effect, its limitations become clearer. Extended life does not automatically bring extended capacity. The body enters later decades carrying the cumulative history of its design choices, not a renewed set of instructions. Evolution did not add layers of protection to match longer lifespan because there was no selective pressure to do so. As a result, longevity stretches existing systems rather than transforming them. This stretching reveals boundaries that were never meant to be tested for so long. One of the most visible boundaries is health span. In many cases, health span has not expanded in proportion to lifespan. People live longer, but not necessarily better. This gap is not a failure of modern medicine or behavior alone. It reflects a biological reality. The mechanisms that preserve function were optimized for a shorter arc. When life extends beyond that arc, decline occupies a larger fraction of time. Longevity increases, but aging fills the added years. Evolution did not oppose this outcome because it did not register it. Another implication of longevity without redesign is accumulation without reset. In systems engineered for long service, components are replaced, upgraded, or reinforced over time. Biological systems lack this modularity. They rely on gradual maintenance rather than overhaul. Longevity extends the period over which small imperfections accumulate without providing mechanisms to fully reset them. Repair continues, but its effects are incremental. Over decades, the difference between maintenance and renewal becomes decisive. Aging reflects the dominance of maintenance over rejuvenation. This dominance was acceptable when lifespan was short. It becomes limiting when lifespan expands. Longevity also alters the balance between individual and population outcomes. Evolution operates at the population level. It does not optimize for individual experience across extended time. When individuals live longer, they experience processes that were never filtered by selection. Pain, frailty, and decline emerge not because they are adaptive, but because they are neutral with respect to reproduction. It does not transform them into targets for evolutionary improvement. This distinction helps explain why aging-related challenges persist despite centuries of survival improvement. They persist because they exist outside the domain in which evolution acts. Another consequence of longevity as a side effect is the illusion of progress. Humans often equate longer life with biological advancement. In reality, longevity reflects environmental mastery rather than biological enhancement. Culture and technology shield the body from hazards without altering its underlying structure. The body remains ancient while life becomes modern. Aging exposes this disjunction. The longer we live, the more apparent it becomes that biological time and cultural time are not aligned. This misalignment reinforces the central theme of the video. Humans age faster than they evolve, because longevity extended life faster than evolution could adapt bodies to sustain it. Aging is not the cost of living long. It is the cost of living long without biological redesign. Understanding this prepares the listener for the next question. If longevity is an unintended consequence rather than a goal, then the role of evolution in shaping lifespan must be reconsidered more carefully, including why it never prioritized eliminating aging in the first place. The final implication of longevity as a side effect emerges when we examine how evolution interprets extended life. Evolution does not measure success by the length of individual experience. It measures success by the continuity of genes across generations. From this standpoint, lifespan matters only insofar as it supports reproduction and the survival of offspring. Once those functions are fulfilled, additional years carry little evolutionary weight. This explains why evolution never prioritized eliminating aging, even when longer life could seem beneficial. Eliminating aging would require substantial investment in maintenance and repair far beyond what is needed to ensure reproductive success. Such investment would divert energy from growth, reproduction, or adaptability, reducing fitness under ancestral conditions. Evolution consistently chose the cheaper solution: tolerate aging rather than eliminate it. This choice was reinforced by the fact that long life did not reliably enhance reproductive output. In many cases, reproduction peaked early, long before aging became limiting. Late life survival did not increase the number of offspring or their likelihood of survival enough to outweigh the costs of extended maintenance. As a result, aging remained evolutionarily neutral. It persisted not because it was beneficial, but because it was affordable. This neutrality is central to understanding why aging was never fixed. Evolution fixes problems that reduce reproductive success. Aging rarely did. Another dimension of this neutrality is uncertainty. In ancestral environments, future conditions were unpredictable. Investing heavily in long-term maintenance carried risk. Energy spent preserving a body that might never reach old age could be wasted. Evolution favored strategies that maximize return under uncertainty. Early life investment paid off reliably. Late life investment did not. This asymmetry shaped the human life course. Longevity beyond reproductive years became optional, not guaranteed. Aging reflects the absence of strong selection to secure that option. Modern humans often project moral or teleological meaning onto this outcome. They ask why evolution allowed aging to persist, as if evolution made a choice. In reality, evolution followed incentives. The incentives did not favor agelessness. They favored sufficiency. Aging is the residue of that sufficiency when life extends beyond its original scope. This perspective dissolves the idea that aging represents unfinished work. It represents completed work carried into new circumstances. Evolution achieved what it needed to achieve. The rest was left unrefined. This understanding completes Truck 8. Longevity is not a triumph of biology over aging. It is a triumph of culture over mortality. Aging remains because biology was never re-engineered to match cultural success. The longer humans live, the more clearly this separation becomes visible. If evolution did not aim to remove aging, and longevity merely exposes its persistence, then the final question becomes philosophical as well as biological. What does aging reveal about the limits of evolutionary problem-solving itself? When viewed from the outside, aging often appears to be an obvious problem. Cells deteriorate, systems lose efficiency, function declines. From a human perspective, it seems natural to ask why evolution did not correct this. Yet this question assumes that evolution operates like an engineer, identifying flaws and improving designs over time. In reality, evolution does not solve problems in that way. It does not optimize for ideals such as longevity, comfort, or sustained performance. It responds only to differential reproduction under specific conditions. Aging does not reliably interfere with that process. As a result, it never became a problem evolution was compelled to address. This is the starting point for understanding why aging was never returned to and fixed. For most of human history, aging unfolded beyond the reach of selection. Individuals who experienced significant age-related decline had already reproduced or failed to do so for reasons unrelated to aging. Late-life deterioration rarely influenced which genes entered the next generation. Without a consistent link between aging and reproductive success, there was no feedback loop through which evolution could act. Aging remained invisible to the mechanisms that drive genetic change. Evolution cannot correct what it cannot detect. Another reason aging escaped correction lies in its distributed nature. Aging is not caused by a single defect that can be removed or replaced. It emerges from the interaction of many small processes: imperfect repair, energy trade-offs, gradual loss of coordination. Each process on its own produces only minor effects, especially early in life. None of them alone creates enough selective pressure to drive a genetic overhaul. Together, they shape decline, but only later. Selection is most effective when a trait has a clear, early, and measurable impact on survival or reproduction. Aging offers none of these. Its effects are delayed, variable, and context-dependent. This makes it an unlikely target for evolutionary intervention. There is also the issue of cost. Eliminating aging would require a fundamental shift in how energy is allocated across the lifespan. More resources would need to be devoted to maintenance and repair indefinitely. In ancestral environments, this investment would have reduced early growth, reproductive output, or responsiveness to stress. Those reductions would have carried immediate fitness penalties. Evolution consistently favors strategies that improve short-term success over those that promise long-term benefit under uncertain conditions. Aging persisted because it was cheaper than agelessness. The body could function well enough without paying the high price of perpetual renewal. This logic also explains why no clear genetic program for aging exists. Aging is not something the body actively executes. It is something that happens when active investment declines. There is no switch to turn off, no single pathway to block. Evolution cannot remove what was never explicitly built. It can only adjust priorities. Those priorities favored early life performance. Aging followed naturally once those priorities were satisfied. Modern humans often imagine that if evolution had more time, it would eventually eliminate aging. This assumption overlooks the fact that time alone does not drive change. Selection does. Without consistent pressure linking aging to reproductive failure, even millions of years would not guarantee correction. Aging is not an unfinished evolutionary project. It is a stable outcome under the rules that govern adaptation. Understanding this reframes the central question yet again. Humans age faster than they evolve, not because evolution overlooked aging, but because aging never qualified as a problem evolution needed to solve. It persisted quietly, tolerated by selection, until modern life made it unavoidable. Another reason evolution never returned to address aging lies in the way benefits and costs are distributed across a population. Any genetic change that meaningfully slows aging would need to provide advantages that outweigh its costs during reproductive years. Such changes are rare because the benefits of slower aging are delayed, while the costs of enhanced maintenance are immediate. Increased repair capacity demands more energy, tighter regulation, and greater complexity. These demands would be paid from the same limited budget that supports growth, immune defense, and reproduction. In environments marked by uncertainty, paying those costs early carried real risk. Individuals investing heavily in long-term maintenance could lose the race to reproduce against those who matured faster and reproduced sooner. Evolution consistently favored the latter. As a result, genes that might have slowed aging were filtered out not because they failed in old age, but because they underperformed when it mattered most. This asymmetry made aging-resistant traits evolutionarily fragile. Slowing aging would require synchronized changes across many systems: metabolism, repair, immune regulation, and tissue renewal. Partial solutions would offer little benefit. Improving one system without adjusting others could create imbalance. For example, extending cellular lifespan without matching changes in immune surveillance could increase instability. Evolution rarely implements such complex, multi-system redesigns unless driven by overwhelming pressure. Its effects were too late, too diffuse, and too variable to force coordinated change. As a result, the body retained a patchwork of compromises rather than a unified solution. There is also the matter of inheritance. Many aging-related processes are influenced by interactions between genes and environment, rather than by single genetic switches. This complexity reduces the heritability of late-life traits. Selection works best on traits that are reliably passed from parent to offspring. When outcomes depend heavily on lifetime conditions, selection becomes inefficient. Aging varies widely, even among genetically similar individuals. This variability weakens the signal evolution would need to act. Without a clear, consistent pattern linking specific genetic variants to reproductive outcomes, adaptation stalls. Evolution does not respond to averages. It responds to differences that affect reproduction. Aging seldom creates such differences in a predictable way. Additionally, evolution often accepts trade-offs that stabilize populations rather than optimize individuals. Aging may play a role in population dynamics by limiting lifespan and turnover, even if unintentionally. While evolution does not plan for population balance, outcomes that prevent indefinite accumulation of long-lived individuals do not face strong opposition. In this sense, aging was never in conflict with evolutionary success. Populations persisted and expanded despite it. There was no crisis demanding correction. The absence of crisis is itself explanatory. Evolution responds to failure, not to imperfection. Aging did not cause failure at the level that matters to selection. It allowed individuals to live, reproduce, and contribute within ancestral limits. That was enough. When modern humans look back and ask why aging remains, they are applying standards evolution never used. Evolution did not aim to maximize lifespan. It aimed to ensure continuity under constraint. Aging fit within that aim. This deepens the central argument. Humans age faster than they evolve because the evolutionary system is conservative by nature. It resists expensive changes unless compelled by immediate reproductive consequences. Aging never provided such compulsion. It remained a tolerated outcome, shaped indirectly by other priorities. Recognizing this prepares the listener for the final stage of the journey. If aging was never corrected because evolution had no reason to correct it, then aging itself becomes a window into the limits of what evolution can solve. The final reason evolution never returned to address aging becomes clear when we consider the limits of evolutionary problem-solving itself. Evolution is not a system that searches for optimal solutions across all dimensions of life. It is a local optimizer constrained by history, trade-offs, and immediate pressures. It works with what already exists, modifying structures incrementally rather than redesigning them from the ground up. It is tied to growth patterns, energy allocation, repair thresholds, and developmental timing. Removing it would require altering the very foundations on which survival and reproduction were built. Such foundational change is rare and risky. Evolution avoids it unless forced. For humans, no such force emerged. Aging did not threaten species survival. On the contrary, the species expanded, diversified, and dominated a wide range of environments, while aging remained intact. Success reinforced the existing design rather than undermining it. Another limit lies in the directionality of evolution. Evolution cannot anticipate future environments or future values. It cannot optimize for conditions that do not yet exist. Extended lifespan, stable environments, and cultural continuity are recent developments. For most of human history, they were not predictable outcomes. Evolution could not prepare bodies for decades of post-reproductive life because such decades were not a consistent feature of existence. By the time they became common, genetic adaptation lagged far behind cultural change. Aging thus occupies a temporal blind spot. It emerges fully only after evolution has already done its work. There is also the question of meaning. Humans often treat aging as a problem because they experience it as loss. Loss of strength, speed, resilience, and eventually autonomy. Evolution does not interpret loss in this way. It does not evaluate individual experience. It evaluates population continuity. From that perspective, aging was neutral. It neither prevented reproduction nor destabilized populations. Evolution had no incentive to intervene. This difference in perspective explains much of the tension surrounding aging today. Humans ask why aging persists. Evolution never asked that question. It never needed to. Aging reveals not a failure of adaptation, but the boundary of what adaptation addresses. It shows where evolutionary logic ends and where human concern begins. This realization reframes the entire narrative. Humans age faster than they evolve, not because evolution is inefficient, but because it is bounded. It cannot solve problems that appear after its criteria have been satisfied. Aging is one such problem. It exists beyond the horizon of selection. It persists not because it is optimal, but because it is irrelevant to the metric evolution uses. This understanding brings Truc 9 to a close. Aging was never fixed because it never broke evolution's rules. It functioned within them. The discomfort, fear, and frustration aging produces are real, but they are human responses to a process that was never designed with human expectation in mind. Recognizing this prepares the ground for the final movement of the video. If aging exposes the limits of evolutionary solutions, then the final question is not whether evolution failed us, but what aging can teach us about being human in a world that now extends far beyond its original design. The final axis begins by returning to a simple observation. Evolution does not operate with awareness of the future. It does not anticipate long lives, extended reflection, or decades of stability. It solves immediate problems with available tools, then moves on. Humans, however, now live in a world where those immediate problems have largely receded. For the first time in our evolutionary history, many individuals survive long enough to observe the long-term consequences of their own biological design. Aging becomes noticeable, not because it is new, but because nothing interrupts it. In earlier eras, danger, disease, and scarcity often ended life before biological limits could fully appear. Today, survival extends past those limits, allowing aging to unfold without interruption. This shift changes the human experience, but it does not change the underlying biology. The body continues to operate according to ancient priorities, while the context in which it operates has transformed. This is where aging acquires significance beyond physiology. It becomes visible as a boundary, not a failure, but a limit that was always present. From an evolutionary perspective, the body is behaving exactly as expected. Repair systems taper. Energy allocation favors early life function. Long-term maintenance remains partial. Nothing in this process violates evolutionary logic. What changes is human perception. Humans are uniquely capable of tracking time across their own lifespan. We remember how the body once felt. We notice gradual shifts. We project ourselves into future states. This awareness does not influence biology directly. Evolution does not respond to memory or anticipation. It responds only to reproductive success. As a result, aging unfolds in parallel with increasing awareness of it. The mind recognizes continuity while the body expresses gradual change. This divergence is not a biological error. It is the natural outcome of cognitive capacity layered onto an ancient organism. The more stable life becomes, the more pronounced this divergence feels. Aging exposes the difference between biological sufficiency and human expectation. Evolution never promised that bodies would remain aligned with long-term plans, identities, or ambitions. It promised only that bodies would function well enough to reproduce under uncertain conditions. Modern humans now inhabit a temporal space beyond that promise. Aging marks the point where biological design meets extended time. It signals where evolution's role ends and where human interpretation begins. This does not yet answer what aging means, but it clarifies what it is not. It is not a punishment. It is not a mistake. It is not an unresolved evolutionary task. It is the expression of a design operating beyond its original scope. Understanding this prepares the ground for the final reflection. If aging reveals the boundary of evolutionary problem-solving, then the remaining question is no longer biological alone. It becomes human. How should a species that outlived its original design understand the time that follows? As this boundary becomes clearer, aging begins to function less like a biological process alone, and more like a lens through which human life is experienced. The body continues to age according to fixed rules, but the meaning of that aging is shaped by awareness. Humans do not simply undergo time. They recognize it. This recognition changes how aging is felt, even though it does not change how aging unfolds. Evolution did not account for this layer of experience. It shaped bodies that could survive and reproduce, not minds that would reflect on decline across decades. As a result, aging occupies a unique position in human life. The biological mechanisms are shared across the species, but the experience of them is filtered through memory, expectation, and identity. This filtering amplifies the presence of aging without altering its cause. From a scientific standpoint, nothing new is occurring. From a human standpoint, everything feels new. This distinction matters. It explains why aging provokes questions that biology alone cannot answer. The body follows patterns established long before reflection existed. The mind notices those patterns and asks what they imply. Evolution does not respond to implication. It responds to outcome. This mismatch creates a space in which aging becomes meaningful, not because it was designed to be, but because humans are designed to seek meaning. As lives extend, this space grows larger. More years are spent aware of change, limitation, and continuity. Aging becomes a sustained condition rather than a brief transition. In ancestral contexts, this phase was short or absent. Today, it occupies a substantial portion of life. Biology did not adapt to fill this space with new purpose. Culture, relationships, and personal interpretation now occupy it instead. This shift does not negate evolutionary logic. It builds upon it. Evolution delivered a body capable of supporting cognition long enough for reflection to occur. What happens after that point was never specified. Aging reveals this openness. It shows that evolution provided structure, but not instruction, for extended life. This is why aging often feels ambiguous rather than purely negative. It brings loss, but also continuity. It limits capacity, but not awareness. The body changes, but identity persists. Evolution did not engineer this persistence for philosophical reasons. It emerged because cognitive continuity improved survival earlier in life. Its extension into later life is a byproduct. Aging exposes that byproduct. It forces a confrontation between a stable sense of self and a changing physical form. This confrontation is not pathological. It is a consequence of living longer than the body was originally required to last. Understanding this reframes the experience of aging once again. Aging is not simply decline observed from the outside. It is change recognized from within. The body ages as it always has. The mind, however, now accompanies that process for much longer. This companionship creates the human experience of aging. It is here that biology hands the question over to human systems. Evolution explains why the body changes. It does not explain how those changes are lived. That task belongs to culture, relationships, and personal frameworks of value. This prepares the final movement of the video. If aging is the point where biological explanation reaches its limit, then the closing reflection must address what remains when explanation ends. How humans might live meaningfully within a body shaped for a shorter time, without denying its limits or resisting its nature. As the final section settles, the question is no longer why aging exists, but how it should be understood. Aging does not represent an unfinished task left behind by evolution. It represents the completion of evolution's role. Evolution carried humans far enough to survive, to think, to remember, and to reflect. It did not accompany us indefinitely, because it never needed to. What follows that boundary is not governed by biology alone. It is shaped by how humans choose to live within biological limits. Aging makes those limits visible. It reminds us that the body is finite, even as awareness continues. This finitude does not strip life of value. It gives value a frame. When time is unlimited, meaning becomes diffuse. When time is bounded, meaning condenses. From this perspective, aging is not simply loss, it is the narrowing of possibility that gives direction to attention. Evolution did not intend this outcome, but it made it possible by creating minds capable of recognizing it. The body ages according to ancient rules. The mind, however, now carries the task of interpretation. This task does not require resistance or denial. It requires alignment. Understanding that the body was shaped for a shorter arc allows expectations to soften. The goal shifts from preservation to participation, from holding on to youth to making use of time while function remains. Aging teaches that durability was never the measure of success. Adaptation was, contribution was, continuity of knowledge and care across generations was. Humans outlived their original design because they learned to protect one another, to share resources, and to reduce danger. Those achievements extended life without altering its biological foundation. Aging is the quiet record of that success. It shows where biology ends and responsibility begins. Not responsibility to fix aging at all costs, but responsibility to live wisely within it. This understanding carries a final educational message. Aging is not something to outrun, and evolution is not something that fell behind. They move on different clocks. One counts years within a life. The other counts generations across time. Humans stand at the intersection of those clocks, aware of both. That awareness is not a burden imposed by aging. It is a capacity granted by evolution. In the end, the question is not why humans age faster than they evolve. The question is what humans choose to do with the years that evolution never planned for. This question has no fixed answer. It remains open, quiet, and personal, waiting in the space where biology has finished speaking.